friends, I'm Texe. It's great to be with you again here from Power of Prophecy. Today we're going to be looking at what I think is one of the most important issues of our day. Recently we did a video that's available here at the ministry entitled Thunder Over Zion. You know, the Bible clearly shows that events are going to head up. I mean, we're going to have a culmination of apocalyptic type events in the Middle East, in the so-called Holy Land, in Israel in these last days. We're going to look today, though, at a secret society, an elite group of men. I believe they have grabbed hold of much of the finance, the commerce, the political rulerships of this world today, and they even have their grasp, almost a stranglehold, on most of the religious groups of today and the religions, including Christianity, unfortunately. These are men of the Illuminati. They are Jewish because there's no doubt the Bible talks about Jerusalem. Revelation 11 verse 8 calls Jerusalem Sodom and Egypt, a very wicked city in the last days. And yet their control extends throughout planet Earth. They have been using the United States as their proxy because for many years they have sought to gain control of the United States because even today this is what is called the last great superpower on earth. To get their way, they must control the United States. With the United States, then the United Nations and all of the rest of the nations of the world, including, of course, the European community, will come under their sway. Now, the Bible, as I said, the Holy Bible, has the answers that we need to truly understand the plot and agenda of these men. But listen to what it says in Zechariah in terms of prophecy. God himself said these words. He says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people." Trouble. And there never seems to be an end to the trouble in Israel, the trouble among the Jews. Then Isaiah 59 verse 8 talks, I believe, of the Illuminati, the Jewish Illuminati. It says, "The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. They have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace." The Bible says, when they shall say, "Peace, peace," then shall sudden destruction come upon them, and they shall not escape. The Apostle Paul wrote about that. A lot of people ask me, Texe, is there proof that there exists this secret elite, this Masonic influence in the world today? I'm convinced there is, and they themselves admit this in many of their most august writings. For example, Manly P. Hall, who was called by the Scottish Rite, that is the largest distribution magazine in the Freemasonry world. Manly P. Hall died a few years ago, but he wrote many books, and he was called in the Scottish Rite Journal, it was called the greatest Masonic scholar of the 20th century. Let me tell you what he wrote in one of his books. He talked about the Hegelian dialectic process, which is he called the universal motion. And basically he talked about the fact that the whole world is being psychically driven to its destiny. But listen what he says about the elite, the Illuminati, the high-level Masons, even beyond, you might say, the 33rd degree. He says there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. Mr. Hall said it is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Manly P. Hall, of course, would know these things because, as I said, he was called the greatest Masonic scholar of the 20th century and was a 33-degree Mason. One of the classic books he wrote is entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Many people wonder aloud today, Freemasonry, is it Jewish? Can we say that it is comprised almost virtually of Jews? Well, one thing is for sure, it is controlled, I believe, behind the scenes by high-level Jewish interest. You know, many, many years ago, from Chicago, Illinois, was a publication that came out called Women's Voice. And back in 1953, they had a feature article called the B'nai B'rith's Clause. Now, the B'nai B'rith is a Jewish Masonic lodge headquartered out of New York City, but with worldwide influence. In fact, even the Pope of Rome invited the B'nai B'rith members to the Vatican and met with them, and I have a picture of that. But notice also this headline in Women's Voice. It says, Freemasonry is jewelry. In other words, if you're a Freemason, you're likely to be a Jew. I've noticed as I've gone around the United States and visited many Masonic lodges, and of course the House of the Temple of Washington, D.C., I've noticed that the prominence and the predominance of the Jewish six-pointed star, the Star of David that you see on the flag of Israel, it seems to be everywhere in Masonic lodges, and there's a reason for that. Here's an article from the CDL report some years ago. It said, Freemasonry is Jewish, say the Jews. So we're not talking about, defaming or slandering Jews. They say that this is true. In the book Anti-Semitism by Bernard Lazare, he says there were Kabbalistic Jews around the cradle of Freemasonry, as certain rites still in existence prove conclusively. They were at the very cradle, at the origins, at the beginning of Freemasonry. Now, Rabbi Isaac Wise, way back in 1855, had this to say. He stated, Freemasonry is a Jewish establishment whose history, grades, official appointments, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from beginning to end. Brother, so-called Masonic brother Rudolf Klein of the Grand Lodge of Saxony in Germany was asked about the Jewish rituals that are conducted in Masonic lodges. And he said, Jewish ritual is customary and valid in all Freemasonic lodges of the world. In the Jewish Tribune newspaper, way back in 1927 in the United States, we read, Freemasonry is based on Judaism. Eliminate the teachings of Judaism from the Masonic ritual, and what is left? In a French publication in 1928 called Le Symbolisme, it says the important duty of a Freemason must be to glorify the Jewish race. So over and over again we see that Judaism is Freemasonry. And this is very fascinating, is it not? Now, we go on to look at some other aspects of this. For example, in the New Age movement, it seems that the New Age movement's leaders also know about the Masonic context of Freemasonry. This is an excerpt from the book The Rays and the Initiations by Alice Bailey. Now, she's the founder of Lucis Trust, which is a combination name, by the way, of Lucifer and Isis. Lucis Trust. And her book, entitled The Rays and the Initiation, way back in 1960, one of the major New Age texts available at all New Age and occult bookstores, she on page 418, she states that the time has now come in preparation for the New Age for certain changes to be worked by Masons with spiritual understanding. She mentions the present Jewish color of Freemasonry. She says the Blue Lodge degrees, that's the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, are entirely Jewish in phrasing and wording. She says even the higher degrees are permeated with Jewish names and words. Now, Alice Bailey, like her mentor, Helena Blavatsky, who wrote The Secret Doctrine and founded the Theosophy Society, was a co-Mason, a woman Mason. Now, this is from a book sent to me from Greece, and some of the Christians over in Greece have been exposing this. I'm sorry you can't read the Greek title of this book, but inside it was a chart from the United States, and I think this is most fascinating. If you'll look at this very carefully, this is from a jewelry store. A jewelry store in New York City. Now, it's Kirschenbaum and Son Wholesaler Jewelries on 78 Canal Street in New York to New York. This is probably about 30 years old. It says that this is a chart of the most important Masonic emblems. And from on the right-hand side, beginning after the Blue Lodge with the 4th degree, Secret Master, going all the way up to the 32nd degree, they have the list of names of the various Masonic degrees, the rituals and the degree that you are awarded if you pass the initiation exercise, drama, and test for that degree. And it shows very clearly, for example, that most of the names have a Jewish influence. There is the Knight of the Brazen Serpent, the Prince of the Tabernacle, Chief of the Tabernacle. There's the Prince of Jerusalem. I mean, how more direct can you be? If you've got the if you've worked up to the 16th degree in Freemasonry, you'll be awarded the Prince of Jerusalem title. And there's a number of others to boot. The Knight Kadosh, number 30, the 30th degree, is also Masonic. Some years ago, as I began to look at Freemasonry and its relationship to Israel, in fact, the control of Israel by Masons, let me repeat that. Today, Israel, the nation of Israel, and the higher level Jewish positions in banking, finance, the media, the corporate world in the United States and Europe, and let me go on and include South America, Asia, and other continents in that as well. The higher level positions are all held by Masons, Freemasons. So the Masonic Lodge and Judaism or Jewry are deeply connected. Now, in a magazine called Inside Israel, the August 1996 edition, now this is an Israeli source, a Jewish source, it gave this fact, and by the way, this was also reported in Mahariv, the daily newspaper in Tel Aviv, and by other Jewish sources in the nation of Israel. Let me just read a little bit to you here. It says, on May 3rd, 1996, Tel Aviv police raided an apartment joined by reporters from the state-run television news program and the daily newspaper Devar Rishon. They found a bizarre scene. The walls were covered in Latin script. Skulls and bones graced the shelves. Swords were crossed and mounted around an altar. 5 doors led to secret passageways with red blinking intruder warning lights. The news report the next day announced, quote, the apartments were used for ceremonies by the Freemasons, an organization whose membership, and we're talking about Israeli membership, Jewish membership, whose membership boasts cabinet ministers and high-ranking army officers. Fascinating. Goes on to say that in spring of 1994, 2 other Israeli publications, Yediat Aronot and the Shishi, published long articles about Freemasonry in Israeli society. Both newspaper reports agreed that Prime Minister, that is the late Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, had been a Mason since the 1960s, and that in 1976, Rabin presided over a large Masonic convention in Jerusalem. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, was also said to be a Mason. He was recruited when he was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in New York City in the 1980s. Both newspapers observed that King Hussein, now he's a Muslim, isn't he? Yes, he is. He's an Arab. But King Hussein of Jordan had been a high-ranking and proud Mason who often traveled to London, England, to participate in secret Masonic ceremonies. Quite fascinating, isn't it? And he goes on to talk about the Masons. Here's a book sent to me by Barry Kamish called Traitors and Carpetbaggers in the Promised Land, a journal of Israel's betrayal Mr. Kamish is a very fascinating writer. He talks in here about the Kissinger connection, the CFR connection, the Clinton connection, the Vatican connection, the Mormon connection, the Rabin assassination connection, and there is a chapter in here about the Masons who appear to be in control of the nation of Israel. Then we go on a little further to document the influence of Freemasonry in Israel. In October 1993, in the La Repubblica, that's an Italian newspaper, one of the most respected daily newspapers in Italy, La Repubblica, October 1993, was an article entitled Israel, the Pact Between Politicians and Masons. Fascinating, isn't it? It reported on a gala 40th anniversary celebration in Jerusalem of the founding of the Great Lodge of the State of Israel of ancient and accepted Freemasons. It says the ceremony was attended by the mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, as well as the chief rabbi, Israel Meir Lau. The chief rabbi of Israel, Meir Lau. Now, here's what the mayor of Jerusalem now, told the gathering of Masons. He said, quote, "You do a great honor to Jerusalem. This is natural," said Mayor Kollek, "considering that King Solomon was the great builder of the temple, which is at the roots of the Masonic idea, and that his workmen were the first Masons." Well, the rabbi now, for his own part, when he got up to speak to this big gala meeting of Masons, Jews came from all over the world to it, Rabbi Lau, now remember he's the chief Jewish rabbi for the whole nation of Israel, he stated this, he said, quote, "The principles of Freemasonry are all contained in the book of books of the Jewish people." It was noted that there were 4,000 Israeli Freemasons, and they were divided into 76 different lodges. I went on the internet and researched this subject. I found, for example, that there is even in Jerusalem a Grand Lodge of Jerusalem. Now, this is also fascinating because I went back and I did a lot of research into all of my Masonic references. Here, for example, is volume 2 of the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Notice on the spine here, it's by Albert Mikey, 33rd degree, and Charles McClenahan, 33rd degree. Okay? Now, in this tremendous resource, and I can't even tell you how many pages it is, but it goes to about 1,000 pages, and notice it's got gold, gilt edging around it. But I found some very interesting information. For example, on page 753, there is a very interesting illustration, piece of artwork of the Masonic Lodge of Jerusalem. They use the name Palestine because, of course, before Israel was founded in the 1947-48 era by the United Nations, that area of the world, Israel, was called, in fact, Palestine. And now today, of course, Palestine, we think of the Palestinian region that's controlled by Yasser Arafat and the PLO. But in fact, that was called Palestine. And this particular piece of art says, this is called the Foundation of the Royal Order of the Freemasons in Palestine. And it's dated AM 4037. Now, AM 4037, you see, the Masons have a different, they refuse to accept the chronological system that goes all the way, the AD that we use, because AD means Anno Domini, or after Christ. So they use their own system, the year of light. This means that this picture of this lodge of the Freemasons in the country of Palestine can be dated back 1,700 years. 1,700 years. Now, we're going to reveal a few secrets to you here about the Masons and the Jews. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of Jewish Masons who set tremendous, well, let's just say they set records for bloodshed and bloodthirstiness. Here is a gentleman, for example. I hesitate to call him a gentleman. His name, Karl Marx. Karl Marx. He's called the father of communism, of course. Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, and the others took his ideas and, you might say, ran with them. Now notice as you look again at the body of Karl Marx, notice that his hand inside his jacket in a very strange position. Of course, that is a Masonic hand sign. That is a Masonic hand sign. He then was a Mason. And by the way, my research shows that he also was a high priest of the Church of Satan. Not the one founded by Anton LaVey in 1966 in California, but the long-standing Church of Satan. He was indeed a satanic priest. He was with a group called the League of Just Men, and he worked very close with a Jewish Zionist. He believed in a new world order for Zionism. He was a Jew. But of course, he was also a Jew, interestingly enough, who hated God. Now, we also have a picture of another, let's just call him, let me clear my throat when I call him that, another gentleman. Here is Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was also, it is now admitted, after the fall of the USSR and the breakup of all their republics under Mikhail Gorbachev, more recently and Boris Yeltsin, it's now admitted that this man, Vladimir Lenin, who founded communism within the USSR, he, Trotsky, Stalin, and others, that he was indeed a Jew. And he was married to a Jew, Miss Krupskaya. So Lenin was 100% a Jew. His mother was a Jew. This was a secret that the Russians kept from the people until just recently, and now the history books are now recording that he was Jewish, as was the number 2 man of the Soviet Communist Revolution, the Bolsheviks, that was Trotsky. He also was Jew. In fact, of the 5 founders, Stalin was not one of the 5 founders, but of the 5 founders of communism, the top 5 founders of communism in Russia, all 5 were indeed Jews, and all 5 were Freemasons. So we have the Masonic Jewish connection. Now, since we know that under communism, probably as many as, it is said, we have really no idea, 25 to 50 million Russians and from the other republics have been massacred, tortured, purged, sent to Gulag concentration camps. Now we can attribute this to those Jewish communist Bolsheviks, of course led by the ideology and the satanic writings of Karl Marx back in the 19th century. Now let's move on up to today. And I believe that the Jewish Masons who run Israel and to a great extent run the United States and Europe today, these men are no less bloodthirsty in my opinion. They just cover it up a lot better. You know, I receive a newspaper called the Jerusalem Post, and I'd like to show you, if I could, an article. In fact, I've made a copy of it so it'd be a little bit easier to show here on television. This is an advertisement in the Jerusalem Post newspaper of November 1994. Let me try to hold that a little straight here for you. Notice this, the sign at the top is the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel logo. This ad says, the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel of ancient, free, and accepted Masons. And it's addressed to the Masons of Peace. Who are they? Well, the Honorable Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of Israel, His Majesty King Hussein of Jordan, and the Honorable Bill Clinton of the United States. It says, with warm fraternal congratulations on the signing of the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. And it's signed by Ephraim Fuchs, President of the Israel Order of Masons. Here we have an admission. He's actually inviting them when they came over for the peace, for a talk with, there was a big Masonic gala extravaganza to be held, and he welcomed Rabin, Hussein, and Clinton. Now remember, Rabin, of course, was the prime minister of Israel, a Jew. But King Hussein of Jordan was a Muslim. And Bill Clinton of the United States was said to be a Christian. But they all were fraternal brothers and Masons and Illuminati, shouldn't we say? Well, today's front page put up by my good friend John Barella had this picture. And of course this was in all of the newspapers, on television. There were the secret, the agreement that was signed that this talks about. These three Freemasons meeting. You see Prime Minister Rabin on this side here. Here's Prime Minister Rabin on this side. In the middle, President Clinton. And on the other side, we have the King of Jordan, Hussein. Now, fascinating as it is, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the King of Jordan, Hussein, died of cancer since this picture was taken just a few short years ago. Clinton, of course, still seems to be in his heyday, and his wife fully intends to run for president very soon. But in any case, here we have these three Masons. Now, I'd like you to look very carefully. You can't really maybe get a close-up, but I wish you could, because if you saw the position of their hands, here I have another picture. It might be a little bit better from another newspaper. And if you look very close, you will see a Masonic handshake between Hussein and Rabin. A Masonic handshake. Oh yes, they are fraternal brothers according to the Masonic organization. And by the way, here they are. This is from U.S. News and World Report. And here they are signing the peace agreement. How happy they were. It seemed to flop and fall apart though, because as you know, the bloodshed and fighting went on and on. Here's a picture in memoriam to Prime Minister Rabin right after he was assassinated in 1995, which goes to show there is no honor among thieves. And some of the more rigid among the Jews are not happy with what even the Masons are doing. And it's highly believed in Israel today that the secret spy agency Shin Bet saw to the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. Now, let's move on a little bit more with our proofs about the Masons that run the lodge today. For example, I recently had a letter from a gentleman. He wanted to remind me that on television was the funeral of Prime Minister Rabin. And he says, "Dear Texe, I want you to know that I watched very carefully the funeral service of the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who took over the government after the murder of Rabin, and the Jordan King Hussein. And I noticed that at the service they called each other brother. After listening to your tapes and other materials, I know now that they meant that they were brother Masons." And yes, that's true, because in the lodge they each call themselves brother, just like the Baptist churches do. And I think that's sort of an interesting parallel, by the way, since many Baptist pastors are Masons, they call themselves brother. Call each other brother, I should say. Now, some years ago, a gentleman who was with a Christian television station in Washington, D.C., asked me, was I aware of the location of what appears to be possibly even a secret lodge in Jerusalem. And I was not fully aware of it at the time. Now I have been doing a lot of research on it. He said, "I'm going to send you the pictures that I took when I made one of my trips to Israel, and you'll find it very fascinating." He said, "I visited in a place that not many Christians go to, the Cave of Zedekiah." Now here is a picture showing the Cave of Zedekiah. It looks like a very forlorn and mysterious place up above this little bus here. But they took them inside this cave nevertheless. Now remember, Zedekiah was the sort of the bad king, if you'll remember, during the time of Jeremiah. And he did what he shouldn't have done and showed the riches of the kingdom of Israel to the Babylonians and caused the invasion of Israel. And Jeremiah prophesied against Zedekiah. So it would be appropriate if inside this cave, and by the way, here is the entrance to the cave. And let me give you a little closer shot of the entrance of the cave. Okay? You can actually visit this place now, although they will not let you into the Masonic lodge. Way deep inside the tunnels of this place, there is a Masonic lodge. They won't let you in that, of course. But they went inside this, and they didn't realize what they were going to find. By the way, here is some of the wording of what you will find inscribed there. It'll tell you all about Zedekiah's cave and so forth. Here's my friend, by the way, inside one of the tunnels, who went in and was able to make this interesting discovery. Here, by the way, is another scene inside the tunnels. You can see they're quite vast and still really quite rough and primitive inside. But deep, deep within, they began to get narrower and narrower, and then finally they came to a door. And this door was locked, and it was padlocked. And my friend asked the guide, what is that inside there in that room? It was apparently a huge room or cavern inside. And he said, that is the Freemasons' Hall. And once a month, he said, the Grand Lodge meets there. These Masons meet under the earth, deep down in Zedekiah's cave. And then he looked and he found this, the amazing thing. He found this plaque on the wall, evidently in Hebrew and English, that told a little bit about the Freemasons' Hall. The Masons, the Masonic Lodge, actually meets deep under the earth in the cave of Zedekiah. Well, how appropriate for Freemasons. Here's an article that came out of, I've got this out of the book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare by Michael Hoffman. I want to give him credit, pages 50 and 51. This article out of the Canadian Jewish newspaper back in 1990, page 29. Picture of a Mason. You can see all of his regalia, his apron and so forth, and the sash and so forth. It says, Cohen, Samuel H. Cohen, is named to the Grand Lodge. And this article says, Samuel Cohen, a native Torontonian from Toronto, an active community leader, recently became the third Mason in the organization's history to become the Canadian representative to the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel. And he says, the lineage of modern Masons can be traced back to the stone masons and builders of the Middle Ages. Very interesting. It says more than 200 Masons from the Grand Lodges, the lodges in Ontario and in other places in Canada, attended a reception in Cohen's honor. It says 2 of the lodges in Ontario, the Mount Sinai Lodge and the Palestine Lodge, are predominantly Jewish. In other words, they're almost all made of Jews, the Masons in those 2 lodges there in Ontario, Canada. They went to a reception for Mr. Cohen. So the Grand Lodge of Jerusalem of Israel actually has representatives from all nations of the world. And this was the Canadian representative. Let's look at some of these Masons in the Middle East area then who have affected world history. Here is the king of Jordan, King Hussein. He died recently of cancer. Here's a picture, I'm sure, sorry it's not too clear, of Shimon Peres, who is a Mason. And he is right here, Shimon Peres. And on the other side entirely is King Hussein. Now in the middle is King Hussein's son, the crown prince, Hassan. And recently when the king died, the crown prince took over. Hey, if you want to need another Mason, I saw him on a TV program actually admit he was a Mason. And remember the Israeli publication that said this man, Benjamin Netanyahu, former prime minister, still one of the most powerful politicians in Israel, and he comes to the United States, speaks perfect English. He has a graduate master's degree, that is, from MIT University in Massachusetts. Here he is sitting in a outdoor restaurant in, I believe it's Tel Aviv, I know it's in Israel, with his wife, and his bodyguards are all around him. He has admitted that he is in fact a Mason. Here's another picture from one of the American news magazines, I believe it's Newsweek, of Mr. Netanyahu. And then here's a picture in a Jewish publication called the Jerusalem Post of Netanyahu. And there he is with one of the Jewish rabbis who is a member of the Knesset, the Shas party, one of the very orthodox Jewish parties in the Israeli parliament. Here's some more pictures for you. Here is the secretary under President Clinton, our secretary. Here's right here, our Secretary of Agriculture. And the caption says, the Agriculture Minister of Israel, Raphael Atan, is seen with the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman. Let's get a little close-up of that again. Dan Glickman, who's the Secretary of Agriculture under Clinton, meeting with his counterpart, Mr. Atan. Now, Mr. Atan is a 33rd degree Mason, and as my book, Days of Hunger, Days of Chaos, proved, Glickman also is a 33rd degree Mason. And by the way, look at the handshake. Yes, it is. It's a Masonic handshake. Oh, they have their secret ways of communicating, do they not? Here's another picture, very interesting. This is King Abdullah II. He has taken over now the kingdom of Jordan. King Abdullah II, they call him. Remember I showed you the picture of the crown prince? His father, King Hussein, died. Now it's King Abdullah II. And he's giving a nice little Masonic handshake to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak. Well, who would ever thought the king of Jordan, a Muslim, would be so Masonically connected with the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Israel. Now we have another set of pictures here. Here are two more Freemasons for you. There is Rabbi Lau, the chief rabbi of Israel, and he's meeting with none other than Mubarak, the president of Egypt. Well, he's a Muslim. And there he's meeting with the chief rabbi. And look at that hand sign of the rabbi. Interesting. Well, we go on more. This is, by the way, that was from the, I want to make sure you understand, that was from the Omega Times newspaper, January 1998. Now we have something interesting. This is the Council on Foreign Relations journal. This is the actual yearbook that the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, the most powerful men in the world meet, the Rockefellers and all the others. They meet, including, most of the Bush administration are members of this, including Colin Powell, of course, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Here is Shimon Peres, former Prime Minister, now Foreign Minister of the State of Israel, and he's giving a nice little Masonic handshake to one of the CFR officials. He was the speaker in New York at a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations. Friends, it gets thicker and thicker, doesn't it? By the way, here is a picture. I can't really see. I don't want to stretch it at all. This is a picture in one of the Jerusalem Report of February 12, 2001. We have a picture from some years ago of the President Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated. There he is here, of Egypt. He was assassinated. He's shaking hands with Ariel Sharon, who was the defense minister of Israel at the time. And right between them is the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Israel. His name was Shamir. Shamir. It's interesting that the name Shamir in Hebrew, I am told, means serpent, the serpent. Shimon Peres, the name Peres, by the way, was not his real name, but he adopted that name. It means black bird. It's sort of interesting, isn't it? Criminal Politics is a magazine that comes out once a month. My good friend, Dr. Lawrence Patterson, does a great job in many respects. He's talking about Robert Dole, former Senate Majority Leader when he ran for president. It says Dole sought the Israeli backing, but it was rejected. They chose Clinton instead, and that may be one of the reasons why Dole lost the election. Here's from an article in the Washington Jewish Week newspaper. It says Dole at B'nai B'rith promises closer ties to Israel. Nevertheless, they said, we're already getting everything we want from Bill Clinton. Why should we change horses in midstream? This is Jerusalem Post, October 31, 1996. Very interesting shot, is it not? This was at the a memorial service for the slain Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. His wife is right below the head there. Notice the U.S. flag, the Israeli flag. And then you see, right over here, you see a gentleman that most of you know his name, Albert Gore, Vice President of the United States. On the other side of Leah Rabin, the widow, is the Rabbi Lau, the same one I showed you with Mubarak. He seems to be everywhere, doesn't he? The chief Jewish rabbi. And, of course, Gore and all the rest of them are indeed Masons. Now, it's interesting. I have a newspaper article that was fascinating that I got from Israel. Everyone was shocked when Gore went to Israel and spoke in the Hebrew language. Look at this. I want to take that picture again. Look at the stance of Gore. Look what he looks like. Isn't that odd? The way he's standing, so straight, so erect, so militant, so Masonic. Okay. By the way, Mr. Gore was funded. His father was was also a senator, Albert Gore Sr., and both of them were funded in their careers by gold mines given to them by the Jewish Masonic Illuminatus Armand Hammer. Way back in American history, of course, we can go back. Here is the $1 bill. And on it, you'll see on the right-hand side here, the symbol, the eagle of the United States. Notice the Jewish influence, though. Did you know that above the eagle on our $1 bill is found the Star of David? Very carefully and craftily constructed. 13 stars in the form of a Star of David. Look very carefully. Get out your dollar bill. I'm sorry if you can't see that clearly, but get a dollar bill out of your billfold and look at it. Then, of course, over the left-hand side, you see the pyramid with the all-seeing eye and the words Novus Ordo Seclorum on this side of the dollar bill. There again, the Masonic symbol. Both the Jewish Star of David and the pyramid are found on the U.S. $1 bill. They were put there by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was said to be secretly a Jew. And, interestingly enough, Mr. Roosevelt, of course, was a high-level Freemason, naturally. Well, let's go on a little bit further and talk a little bit about Freemasonry. We have, for example, the B'nai B'rith. I'd like to talk a moment about the B'nai B'rith of Freemasonry. The B'nai B'rith, says this article in the Chicago Tribune of April 18, 1993, B'nai B'rith. Now remember I told you that is the Jewish Masonic Lodge. They also control the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, the B'nai B'rith, very powerful Freemasons, headquartered out of New York. But yet this article says that they are a target of a police probe. It turns out they've been spying on Americans. That's what I call it, in my opinion, spying, keeping files and records on pesky and troublesome Americans that they don't agree with, their politics. And they work very closely with the FBI and the CIA. I believe the Jewish ADL and the B'nai B'rith, this Jewish Masonic Lodge, my opinion is they control the FBI. Remember, the founder of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was a 33rd degree Freemason and was thought to be Jewish as well. Here's a picture of a no-good. The late Roy Bullock. He was also arrested by the police. Look at that thug, if you will. And it was said that he was breaking into people's apartments and stealing materials and such as that. And Bullock was an agent evidently for the Jewish ADL. Now, because of their political influence, many of the charges were later dropped, I understand. They paid some kind of a fine or something, the B'nai B'rith did. Here's an article I have, very interesting, out of, let's see, it's the New York Times. It says, on March 22, 1984, the Pope, the Catholic Pope, held a meeting with members of the International Jewish Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. He acknowledged the close relationship between B'nai B'rith and the Catholic Commission for Religious Relationships with Judaism. Interesting. And he said there is constant development and strengthening of these relationships. Now, since it's believed by most people that Pope John Paul II is indeed a high-level Freemason, and we can see then why he is connected with Jewish Freemasonry and with the lodge that controls Israel. Now, what is the goal of the Masonic Lodge over Jerusalem? And the Jews, the high-level Masonic Jews who run much of this world, what is their goal? Well, Albert Pike in 1871 wrote a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini. These were the two leading Freemasons throughout the world. Pike is the man who designed and constructed the 33 rituals for today's Scottish Rite Freemasonic order, the largest order in the world. Pike is probably known by the Masons as their greatest hero in history. He was, by the way, a Confederate Civil War general. And Abraham Lincoln evidently had every intent to hang him after the war for his horrible crimes against humanity, but he fled to Canada until after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But Pike wrote a letter. Pike wrote a letter to Mazzini, his Italian and European counterpart, and Mason and Illuminist. And he said, our goal is a series of 3 great wars, world wars. 2 will be fought in Europe. The 3rd and final war will be fought over the Middle East. And he said this final war will include a conflict between the 3 primary religions on earth. The Islamic religion, the Christian religion, the Jewish religion. And these 3 religions will battle each other for superiority and will destroy each other in a horrible apocalyptic cataclysm. But we will foment the 3 wars that will bring this about. And then, of course, their plan was that their great leader would come forth, that Lucifer himself would ordain the final leader of international Freemasonry. I believe that's, from all the literature, that's the only conclusion one can come to. And he will go to Jerusalem. It will be his world capital. He will rebuild the great temple, but it'll be a temple like nothing you've ever seen before. They will say, yes, the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians can all worship here. This will be a temple of all religions and no religions. And the Antichrist will represent all of humankind, except true, Bible-believing Jesus Christians. And he will go furiously to destroy every vestige of Christianity that he can. What is the goal then? First, they would have to demolish the current structures that sit atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. What sits there? The Golden Dome. The Golden Dome. Mosque of Islam. The Golden Dome. There's also the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's there. But that Golden Dome has to go. They believe that their temple must be built right on top of that. In fact, the Qatar Coronati, that's the scholarly lodge out of London, England, of Great Britain, sent one of its top professors and scholars, archaeologists, to Israel just a few years ago. And he determined that the very place where the Muslims say that Muhammad was lifted up and ascended in heaven, that is the very place where the Ark of the Covenant must sit. And so the dome must go. How can they get rid of the dome? Well, there must be a war in the Middle East. There must be a World War III, just as Pike told Mazzini, and it must be focused and centered on the Middle East. And maybe those buildings will be destroyed. Maybe they'll blame it on Iran or Iraq or some other Muslim Arab leader. They will say the missiles went over there and strayed, from the Arab country, Iraq, Iran, and strayed and blew up. They blew up their own temple. The Arabs did it to themselves. I don't know what their pretext will be. Or there may be other ways that they will get rid of this. Now, interestingly enough, in Time magazine several years ago, talked about a tremendous controversy that had erupted over in Israel. It seems that the Jewish rabbi, Lau, the chief rabbi, that name keeps coming up, doesn't it? Here he is visiting tunnels under the Temple Mount. The Jews opened up these tunnels that had not been opened for hundreds of years, centuries, and they began to go in there and visit those tunnels. And the Muslims were outraged because they believe. And here below we see in the bottom of this article, it talks about the situation, the setting up, or where these tunnels are underneath the Temple Mount. You can see, of course, here the Dome of the Rock of the Muslims that sit there now. And the plan, they believed, was to use these tunnels to set explosives that will blow up. So they would foment a World War III or a war with the Arabs. And then just as all the bombs were going off in various cities, maybe in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Iraq and Iran, at the same time missiles or bombs supposedly could be blamed as the cause for the destruction of the Islamic worship places. But in fact, it would be that Jewish agents with powerful bombs would go down deep in these tunnels and blow up the Temple Mount. And this, of course, if this occurred, this could set off World War III, could it not? The fury of the Arabs, of the Muslim world. But of course, Kriegel Publications, a Christian publication a few years back, published this book, the Kriegel Guide, a pictorial guide to the temple. This is Herod's temple. And this is the temple that many believe that the Masons and the Jews want to rebuild. Others talk about building the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon. Now, I might mention that if the temple is built again, of course that would fulfill 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul talked about the Antichrist just before the gathering of the saints by Jesus. The Antichrist would go into a rebuilt temple and declare that he was God and above all gods, and his strong delusion would fall on all the people of the world. Here's an article, by the way, from the Houston Sunday Globe talking about the red heifer. The Jews say we must find a red heifer, a cow that is perfect, that is totally red and does not have one white hair, does not have one brown hair. He's got to have beautiful red hair. He's got to be a perfect physically in every way. And here's a rabbi inspecting this red heifer. They believe they may have found one already. And then they will sacrifice this red heifer and use the ashes in the temple. The sacrifice can begin again in a rebuilt temple. Here, a Christian publication, Prophetic Observer, talks about the ashes of the red heifer. But listen to this, my friends. Jesus is the one sacrifice. And if the temple is built again and the Jews begin to have their sacrifices, listen to what Matthew 24 verse 15 says. It says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." My friends, that would be the abomination of desolation, to actually sacrifice this red heifer in the temple, the rebuilt temple. Of course, the Bible makes very clear that another temple is going to be built someday, a temple built without hands. And there will be a new Jerusalem, not this earthly Jerusalem, a Jerusalem constructed by Jesus Christ. In the book by Ice and another gentleman, here is a picture of the entrance of the rabbinic place in the Jerusalem where they are now training rabbis and workers to go into the rebuilt temple and to conduct the sacrifices. Here is a man, Rabbi Yehuda Getz, a chief rabbi of all the holy places in Israel. Now that's a different position than Rabbi Lau. And this rabbi claims that he knows where the Ark of the Covenant is, of course, and that they're ready to put it in the rebuilt temple. Of course, that's nonsense, because the Ark of the Covenant is now in heaven. There are museums. There are museums in Israel today. And these museums actually have scale models of the Temple Mount with the rebuilt temple. Oh, they're planning on doing it, my friends. See these? See these scale models? And by the way, one of these scale models, it can be found in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. Yes, there is a Rockefeller Museum. What are the Chase Manhattan Bank's Rockefellers doing with a museum in Jerusalem? And why does it have a scale model of the temple to be rebuilt? By the way, here's a model of the Ark of the Covenant that these Jews of the Temple Mount Foundation claim that they have readied. They say the real Ark, they know where it's at, but here is just a part of it. By the way, in his book, Albert Pike, remember I talked about him, the former sovereign grand commander of Freemasonry. In this old book, Morals and Dogma, that he wrote, he talks about the meaning of the Temple of Solomon and the necessity of building a Temple of Solomon. In fact, he said, in essence, symbolically, the Temple of Solomon is built in the life of every Mason. So it is their goal to rebuild this Temple of Solomon. Now, let's move real fast here, and I want to tell you about this book, an amazing book. This man, John J. Robinson, wrote this book, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. The Masons raved about this book. It was reviewed in their publication, the Scottish Rite Journal. They loved this book. Robinson was actually promoted, if my understanding is correct, to the 33rd degree of Freemasonry through this book. He was not even a Mason at the time he wrote it, but he was promoted. Look at the front cover. What do you see there? You see the Masonic emblem with a G. That's meaning of God, the meaning the generative principle. But look, it is slowly transformed into what? Of course, the Jewish Star of David. Isn't that fascinating? Now, let me tell you a little bit about this book. Mr. Robinson said in the final chapter of this book that it should be the goal of Freemasons worldwide to build a new temple, the Temple of Solomon, and it should be built there on the Temple Mount. And all religions, not only the three major religions, all religions, but as particularly the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians, can go to the great Temple of Solomon built by the Masons on the Temple Mount. That's what it says in this book. That's what it says in this book. Powerful, powerful proposal to build a Masonic Temple of Solomon on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This then is their goal, and their leader will go into this incredible temple. You might want to get my video, Thunder Over Zion, and it talks about the Antichrist and how they will actually stage the coming of the Antichrist. There's even a book that's been written called The Armageddon Script that has the entire script. It'll be a theatrical production. It'll be televised. Everyone will believe in him. Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Jews, except the true believers of Jesus. Now, friends, what are we to do about this? You know, the Apostle Paul said that the Jews are in bondage. Jerusalem, earthly Jerusalem, is in bondage. I believe we need to pray. We need to pray for the salvation of Jews. We need to pray even for these Masons that their eyes will be opened. We need to pray for our protection. And we need to pray that God will give us even more knowledge of these events of the last days. He promised us in Daniel 12:10, the wise shall understand. Pray for more wisdom. Pray that Jesus Christ's will be done. This is Texe Morris. May God richly bless you.